Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Making Records with Eric Valentine. That's me. There's a little hiatus there. Sorry about that. Things got crazy. What happened was I got this thing sort of working close enough, or things together close enough where I could actually use it, and then there's stuff that needed to get done. So I got into some recording, and as soon as that happens, once you add that to the mix, you know, I have 2 renovations going on, dadding, husbanding, undertoning, and then add on, it goes crazy. And so, you know, I just end up in that place where I'm just like behind on everything, everywhere, all the time. And so it's been like that for a little bit. So I had to take a break. There's just no spare time, you know. I don't know. It's just, the other thing is like the way, you know, the music business works is typically they never seem to call and go like, hey, we're going to need this thing in a couple of months. Great, you know, you have plenty of time. You can get a head start on it now, you know, that we just wanted to let you know early. That never happens. What happens is they call and they go, oh my God, we needed this thing yesterday and we have to have it right now, you know. And so then that becomes the priority, and I end up pushing everything else out of the way in order to try and meet the deadline. And there was a bunch of that stuff going on. And, you know, it's just amazing what happens. You know, I start neglecting just the basic things in my own life, you know. my license and driver's license ended up getting suspended over a stupid, you know, speeding ticket because just not being attentive to my own life. So yeah, it got super crazy. Everything's kind of smoothing out now. Got my license back. That was good. So a bunch of stuff happened in these last couple months, whatever it's been since the last time I was on here. Grace's new record got announced. So, and there's some songs up there, and actually like a week from tomorrow, the whole record will be out. And so I've been making sort of vague references to, there was, you know, a couple of records that were done at this Nashville studio, one of which was Nickel Creek. You know, I went through all that. But the other one was Grace's new record, was done at Nashville RCA Studio A. And so that thing's out there. I think there's 4 songs up there right now that you can check out, just like early listens on the record. The whole thing will be out soon. We're going to try and do an episode for that on the day that it's released, and so it'll be a proper, you know, production, deconstruction, and a bunch of details about the recording of that. And man, I cannot say enough how proud I am of this record. I'm just so grateful to have been a part of it and have the opportunity to do this record where we did it, the way we did it, with the people that were available to, you know, play on it and the whole thing. It was an incredible experience, like the most synergistic recording experience I've ever had. Just the group of people that we had in the room. The way they all gelled and played together, and the way it all added up was so incredible. I've never seen it happen like this, where we were mostly unprepared. Grace had some vague ideas for songs, but we'd just come in and go like, hey, there's a song idea. It kind of goes like this, and people just start figuring out parts, and within, you know, 15, 20 minutes, it's like, whoa, this is so cool, you know. And I barely had to do anything, you know, like my guidance generally to the guitar player. We had amazing Nick Bockrath from Cage was playing guitar in session. You know, I would just, you know, my advice was just play guitar, you know. He would always come up with amazing parts. He's so good. And everybody was like that on the session. So super, super fun. And this recording is a really, really great example of what my workflow is now and what I think it will be for the foreseeable future. It was a little bit of an experiment and template of how I wanted to approach things here. It was a real confirmation that this is definitely how I want to do things here. And so it was cool to like test that out in the process of sort of designing the setup here, because this is kind of an odd setup in this place. You know, there's no console, but you can function as if there's a console. The way I have it set up, you get all of what I consider to be all the benefits of working on a console still available to you. So it was a test of that thing, sort of a proof of concept of that approach. I couldn't be happier with the way it came out. Just super excited about this one. I can't wait to share it with everybody. That'll happen on Friday. We'll pick a song and do a deconstruction. I think Grace is going to be able to sit in with me. We've done that once, I think at least once before, and it's entertaining for sure. So there's that. And then I got to do some recording in this new thing, in this new barn setup. And man, I hadn't realized like how much had really built up to this. I've been working on building this goddamn place for fucking 2.5 years. It's been a lot. It's a lot of work. It's taken a huge amount of energy and focus and planning and all this stuff. And it was very dramatic at times. Trying to push through making it happen. It's still going. There's stuff going on. There's major shit going on outside because now we're adding a deck to the front of it, so it's just never ends. But in there, I was able to actually do some recording in the sound room. Grace's band came to do some rehearsal. They did some rehearsing. They went off, did a series of shows, then came back. We needed to do some live in studio performances of the songs on the records. It's a common part of releasing and promoting albums now. The bands will typically do live in studio, live somewhere, recordings of the new songs in the album, just another way to sort of like put the songs and the album and the artist out in front of people. It's kind of crazy how things have changed. Man, it's a lot of work, putting out a record. You used to just put out a record, do some interviews, there you go. But no, you have to create like this other gigantic mountain of content to put out there to service all the social media and all that stuff. And so we did some recordings for that. It was a cool opportunity to finally actually really see what this thing is going to do. And there was so much buildup to this one moment. And I have like a particular test that I have to really see if a recording space is going to be a good sounding recording space or not. Of course, it's with drums. That's really my primary, reference point, is just how drums sound in a room. I'm so familiar with it. I grew up playing drums. That's just like, it's the thing I know. And so I set up a drum kit in the room. You just put one mic, one mono overhead over the drum kit, at about, head height when you're standing up. And anywhere around the drum kit, play some drums, see what you got. And, so I set it up. I had Grace's drummer play some stuff, come into the control room, and I was literally like sweating, just like, God, I hope this doesn't suck. Oh my God, if this doesn't sound good, just what has this all been for? Because I know myself, and it's like, if it doesn't sound good in there, I'm not going to fucking use it, and just fucking 2.5 years and all this money and shit, and be like, let's go somewhere else, because I'm not really into those kinds of compromises. So, I turned up the speakers, and it sounds incredible in there. Oh my God, it's so good. And I kind of knew, I knew a little bit just standing around the drum kit, because I had just experienced it at the RCA studio. That is incredible. I think I talked about it already. It's an amazing sounding sound room. And so I knew that the dimensions of this room are very similar to that. Similar to that room, and also similar to Abbey Road Studio 2, which are two, very time-tested, high-regarded sound rooms, that have really proved themselves to sound great, especially for recording bands. Because Studio 2, as I understand it, for Abbey Road was really where like the Beatles and Pink Floyd and all that stuff happened. So I mean, I had a feeling that I was in that zone, and finally got to hear it, and it's really, really incredible. And I think it really boils down to mostly the ceiling height is the issue. And so in this room, the peak of that, A-frame ceiling is up 30 feet. It's quite high. And there's something about that ceiling height that makes a huge difference. And it was similar at RCA, from what I understand. There's a similar ceiling height at Abbey Road Studio 2. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's somewhere in that range. And so what you get when you listen to the microphone is like there's this amazing support, especially for the snare drum and the drum kit, this big, warm, fat sound just with the overhead mic. And with the recordings that I've been doing, there's, I'd say, at least half of them, if not, yeah, maybe 3/4, no snare drum mic, just overhead. And I get so much of a just like big, solid presence from the snare drum that you don't need the snare drum mic. And it sounds so much cooler that way, you know, without a microphone 1 inch from the snare drum, which just doesn't sound like a snare drum in a room, you know, it just, I don't know, sounds like something else. And so that was like a huge, like, woohoo, and a huge, oh my God, thank God this thing sounds good. So that's super exciting. Well, I'll be able to start sharing some of the stuff that's getting captured in this place. Now that it's happened and it's working, and I'm super excited about it. It's going to be really fun to share that stuff. So that happened. I'm actually still right now in the process of trying to finish, you know, some of those mixes. There was just, you know, we ended up going to California for a bit. We got stuck in California. I had the worst, you know, air travel debacle I've ever been subjected to in my life. It was unreal. Like, you couldn't get anywhere. Everybody was screwed. Everybody was screaming and pissed off in the airports. Everybody was stranded. I got stranded in Washington, D.C., Dulles, with a 5-year-old in the middle of the night. You know, it's like, oh boy, here we go. This is great. And it's too, the whole saga is just too boring and awful to repeat, but it was the worst I've ever experienced. So I got stranded on the way to California. And then we got stuck in California. We literally could not get a plane to take us back to Vermont because of the huge storms. There was crazy, catastrophic flooding in Vermont. Obviously, I'm sitting in this room. It looks relatively dry. It stayed dry. That was another huge, like, whew, oh my God. Being stuck in California, just watching the news of all of this stuff that was unfolding in Vermont, just praying that our house and this new place that was barely, you know, not just getting the finishing touches, didn't get destroyed. That was extremely painful. But we had somebody staying at our house to keep an eye on things, and kept checking just in case we pulled stuff off the ground, you know, if stuff was going to flood. But the barn studio space stayed totally dry, nothing at all. The house was definitely trying to flood, and the basement has pump pits in the basement. When we moved into that house, I replaced both of the pumps, brand new pumps in there, put these sealed containers around them, everything. They kicked in at about 5 or 6 p.m. That night. It continued to rain like downpour, from what I understand, through the whole night. And so those pumps saved our basement. Pretty exciting. Apparently that basement did flood in Hurricane Irene in 2015. Yeah, I think so. So yeah, that was exciting. So then some other stuff happened. We got a new family member. We have a dog. He's over there. He's just asleep over there. You can't see him. Maybe he'll move back to his bed at some point while I'm talking and be able to get a look at Max, the dog. And what ended up coming with the dog was another event. So we had the dog for, I don't know, maybe about a week. The dog sort of kind of fell into our life through a family that we're friends with. He's an amazing dog. I'm so excited. I had a dog for a long time in Southern California. So yeah, I had a dog that came to the studio with me every day for, 13, 14 years. I love having a dog, but then things got super crazy, and it was, too complicated to have a dog. But oh, there he is. He's groaning over there. And so we came across this dog that was available through a family that we know. And when I met the dog, I was like, okay, this is the dog we got to get. Like, if we're ever going to have a dog, we should do this right now, because he's an amazing dog. He's incredible. He's a shepherd mix and the most trainable, obedient dog. He's, like play driven for training. He's not food driven. He has no food drive at all. You'll put down a bowl of food and he'll kind of go like, yeah, maybe I'll eat some. It's really interesting because my other dog was the opposite of that. So it's been a little bit of a learning curve for me trying to figure out how to train a play-driven dog. But it's really cool. It's like we have this, this one ball, and you can play fetch with him. You can throw that ball, he'll bring it back to you all day, drop it right at your feet, all day, never stop. It's his favorite thing in the universe. And so it's a great motivator for training. It's really incredible. It's the only thing he cares about. When he has that ball in his mouth, like you could hold up a T-bone steak in front of him, he won't drop it. And so that's the one thing I got to figure out is how to get the ball away from him once he has it. But we're working on that. So then we got the dog, wonderful, love him. His name's Max, love Max. And there was a day, Grace had just got back from a little short run of shows, like a weekend shows. She'd been back for maybe a half an hour, and I had to go over, we were at the house, I had to go over to the barn to get to get a tool. I had to break down some boxes and stuff. And so as I do literally half a dozen times a day, I hopped on my bike to go over to the barn. And it was hot, like no shirt, no helmet, because it's like a 10-second bike ride over to the barn. Just gonna zip over there, grab this tool, come back, do what I need to do. So I get on the bike, and Max pretty much follows me everywhere. He's like my little shadow. So we start going over there, and here's the dumb part. I start thinking like, man, I wonder how fast this motherfucker really is. And so I start really going for it. He's chasing me on the bike, and I'm just jamming on the bike. And then he catches up to me and then just drifts right into my wheels. And all I remember, I was on the bike, see him go into my wheels and go, whoa, 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 whoa. And then nothing. So I went down, no helmet, knocked out cold, completely unconscious on the ground. And when I left, our son, Sagan, decided after the fact, he's like, oh, I want to go with Daddy. So he got on his little Strider bike and was following after me. And by the time he got over the bridge, apparently he saw me on the ground, head in my hands, just blood everywhere. And so he ran back to the house like, Mama, something bad happened. There's blood, blah, 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 Daddy, blah, blah. So she came over the car, picked me up, and my first memory after seeing, Max drift into the wheels was being in the car on the way to the emergency room. So I got in a pretty fucking serious bike accident. It was really gnarly. And so there was a period of time there, even if I had time to do a YouTube, man, I looked like, you can still see I have some like, I got like a good sort of like Bond villain scar on my face now. It'll kind of toughen me up a little bit, maybe toughen up my look here. I think that's a new career for me. I can be like an action movie bad guy now. And so that was really crazy. Like, I've never been knocked out before. I'm generally not a particularly accident-prone person. I don't usually do risky stuff. And I didn't think riding my bike for 10 seconds from my house to my barn would be, risky. But having a dog run into your wheels was not something I was expecting. That really caught me off guard. So it took a little while to recover from that, and being knocked out is a weird experience, man. There's just a whole period that's a little foggy. Well, yeah, I mean, there's probably about 5 to 10 minutes that are just totally erased, that are totally gone. I have no recollection of it. They did a scan of my head and all that shit, make sure there was no internal bleeding, all that. Everything's fine. I feel totally fine now. No long-term effects from it, but that was a little scary there. So I'm definitely going to be a little more careful, not racing my dog on the bike anymore. Actually, it's funny because I think he got tangled up in the bike when I went down, and so when I get on that bike now, he literally runs the other direction. He doesn't want to get anywhere near me on that fucking bike. So, okay, so that's all the crap that happened. I don't know if anybody's interested in that. I'll probably put a note in there. You can skip all this shit if you want to get to the audio stuff. So here we go. Now let's get into the actual content of this episode. This is what I'm calling the end of the rainbow episode, because I'm going to show the final stages of tuning the acoustics of this room. Man, am I happy with them. I've actually been working on these speakers and mixing on these speakers, recording on the speakers. Oh my God, it's good. Oh boy, it's good. Just even, doing these live performance recordings in this room compared to what was captured at RCA, doing mixes, I'm A-Bing to the album versions, and being able to really hear so much more clearly what's going on just in the mid-range and everything. It's really, oh boy, it's great. And so I'm super excited about it. So let's get into this. So when I left off of the last one, the last episode, I'd done the VPR panels, and you can still see some of those up there. Let's see if I can figure out. Yeah, so those are the VPR panels on the wall there. And I have to say that, what was described to me at the time, when I was going to build these things, was open window down to 60 hertz. They are not that. They're not that. It definitely, the VPR thing, having that resonant metal panel, definitely extends, the absorption into a lower range. But, if you really look at the graphs of what the company, that Renz company in Germany, what they're building, when you look at what they're doing, down around 50, 60 hertz, it's actually tapered off. The absorption is tapered off quite a bit, so it's only getting maybe 20, 30% of the energy that's being presented with down in that range. It's still absorbing some there, but not a whole lot. But, when you're in the like 100 to 200 range, man, it's grabbing, most everything at that point. So I think there is some value there. But when, ultimately my vision was I'd put these things everywhere on the ceiling and all the walls and all over the place, and I'll be done. My control room's going to sound great. Done deal. And that didn't happen. And so here we go. Let's pull up the graph. Let's see. Do I have the right version? I do. Okay. So this is where I ended up, on with just the VPR panels on all surfaces of the room. And so when you're looking at this graph, you got to ignore this part, because at a certain point I started doing graphs of both speakers, and I have only one microphone. And if the distance of that microphone is a little bit different from one speaker to the other, then you get these cancellations in the high frequencies. And at this point, I'm really only concerned with this range. So I wasn't really paying attention to this, and you shouldn't either. It's really not like that. So I still got some real stuff to figure out here, especially here, right? So this is whatever it is here, 53 hertz, maybe, 52, 51 hertz, somewhere around there. Okay, so this stuff is averaging somewhere around -7, something like that. The bottom of this peak is like, -23. So, that's like a 15, 16 dB, cut at this frequency. That's pretty bad. In fact, I'd say that's really bad. And you can really hear it, when you're sitting in this seat. There's another one here, and so this is most likely that there's an acronym for it. There's I can't remember. Everybody was mentioning it in comments. I can't remember it, but this is this issue, the back wall to the speaker. So that's right there. And then there's another one, which is some sort of harmonic of some of these other issues that are going on. It's up here around whatever this is, 212. Here, let me move this one here. We can keep an eye on these dips. And this one's about 113. So this one is probably a few dB less than that. So this has got like a good 12 dB. This is probably a good 10 dB. These are some major issues. And so just to sort of tease the whole thing here. So this is where I ended up. We can look at that. So that's the final thing. That's what it was. This is what I'm hearing now. And probably more importantly, because there's a little bit of EQ going on here. There's a little bit of EQ in this spot, a little bit of EQ right around here, just to fill in a couple of those voids. But here, more importantly, this is what it is with no EQ. And so all just from acoustic treatment of the room, I went from that to this with just treating the room. That's what's important here. And then this is with the little bit of EQ, do that stuff. And so, you know, this is probably, I don't know what this is, maybe 4 dB there, a similar move here, maybe 4 dB there to get it up. Only 2 moves. So, you know, that's a modest amount of EQ, certainly compared to some stuff that I've done, you know, when I was at Barefoot. There was, I just hadn't quite, you know, got it this good with just the acoustic treatment. Had to do some more severe EQing in that place to make it work. And so I was more than happy to do this little bit. And I guess, you know, you can see ultimately once I was getting really close to the end, then I created a mark on the floor and had a string attached to my microphone so I could center it exactly on this little target on the floor and line up the distance between of the microphone between left and right speakers very precisely, and flatten this out. So towards the end, you know, I got the positioning of the microphone more precise, so I wouldn't, you know, have to look at that cancellation, which has nothing to do with really what I'm hearing in the room. Okay, so what happened was I ended up bringing a bunch of tube traps with me from Barefoot. They were there, they were available. I knew I wanted to use some of those in the room, particularly on the front side of the room. And I saw some comments about this. I wanted to mention this, that people were saying that, you know, you can get rid of this cancellation in this sort of like 110 hertz range if you soffit mount the speakers. So there is a benefit there doing that. It can also extend the low frequency response of the speakers. There are some benefits to soffit mounting. The thing for me that I lose is that when you have the speakers sort of sitting out front of the wall, it creates this dead space on that wall all around the speakers. And that creates an opportunity for me to fill that space with low frequency absorbers, with bass traps. And so that's the reason that I wouldn't do a hard face bass trap, because you create a hard surface on the front side of the wall, and then you got to figure out how to remove that wall from reflecting low frequencies back in the room. You don't really have the space to do it anymore. And so that's why, at least for me, I've been preferring this approach of not soffit mounting, freestanding speakers. I use the voids that are created between the speakers and on the outside of the speaker to, you know, add a bunch of bass trapping, and it just helps with the performance overall in the room. You know, soffit mounting might help one thing, it might give me more low end. I don't need it in this room. Everything was sort of designed to support the response of the speakers, and it actually ended up really doing that. And so I would rather be able to just use that space to clean up the response of the whole room. So there's that, soffit versus no soffit. That's at least my take on it. So I started adding the tubes that I did have to the room. And I remember at Barefoot, there was one point when I first discovered tube traps, what I would do with them. And so the first, you know, I made these two like huge ones. They're 22 inches in diameter. They're massive. I think the walls are either 2 inches or 1.5 inches thick, and put them in the front quarters of the room, just outside of the speakers, stuffed all the way in the corners. And the difference with and without those was so dramatic right out of the gate. It was like, whoa, oh my God, these things are actually doing something. And this was sort of the beginning of me really having some tools to be able to tune a room with just the acoustics of the room. You know, I was using fuzz measure, which I still use, really enjoy using that, and started using tube traps. It made all the difference. So here we go. I put those same two 22-inch diameter tubes in the front corners next to those things, and look what happens. So already, right out of the gate, we've got, you know, we've gained 1, 2, 3 dB here, probably something 3 or 4 dB here, here. Like all of these, you know, cancellation points are being diminished just with 2 tubes right up front. So that's like 3 or 4 dB of EQ that I don't have to do right there. Okay, so then what do we have next? Okay, so then I did an experiment with the panels. I was really curious to see if it really made a difference, and I saw this. There was a demonstration of this with the setup with one panel behind a speaker. If you watched the VPR episode, what it did, you know, having the foam pushed tight so it's in contact with the metal versus being spread out. I did that experiment with the whole room. I wanted to see how much of a difference that would make in the whole room. And so this, oh, okay, yeah, actually I did this sort of in the wrong order. So this is with the panels loose in the room. So the metal is free floating in between the foam. And then this is with everything pushed tight, so they're making contact. And there is a tiny bit of difference here. Let me move these out of the way. These numbers are actually sort of interfering with what we're being able to see. But you can see that the efficiency, those panels' ability to grab some of these lower frequencies was definitely improved by having the panels loose and not having them in contact with the metal. So it was further confirmation that approach, I think, really does improve things, you know, by a little bit. These are all sort of drops in the bucket. Okay, so then this one is, what is this one called? Let's see. I gotta see my notes. Okay, so then now I put, I had a bunch of tubes from Barefoot. I put them all up front of the room. So there's the 2 big, huge 22-inch ones. I put ones in between the speakers on top of this. I have a little credenza that's holding some outboard gear that's at the front of the room. It's all the stuff that I don't really have to like be in the sweet spot to adjust. So it's more like compressors and stuff. The EQs I like to have closer to me so I can be in the sweet spot while I'm adjusting EQs. You'll be able to see this later when we get into some mixing, but I actually have a setup that I can pull right next to me. It has all of my EQs right here, just like having a console. It's just sitting there right next to me. So compressors are up there. So I put a bunch of tubes on top of this, these racks, this little credenza over there. And so you can see this now, what has happened. So even more improvement. And here's this thing, you know, from the back wall. Really, really a huge improvement there. Almost totally eliminated that. Just putting these tubes. And these tubes are anywhere from 12 to 14, 16 inches in diameter. They're all sort of in that range. I had a variety of sizes. And the way the tubes work, they are wonderfully broadband. And so the diameter doesn't make a huge difference. It does make a difference. So the larger diameter tubes will push and extend the low frequency absorption down into the lower range, but it's not like a Helmholtz resonator where it's this really tuned specific thing. It's all very broadband, makes them way, way easier to use. And so, put a bunch more tubes up front. This improved a lot, this improved. Okay, so then at that point, I was still sort of like in this idea of like, I don't want to fill my whole room with tubes. They do take up a fair amount of space. I was really hoping that I was going to be able to get away with these VPR things, which are really only 6 or 7 inches deep, you know, and be done with it. And so at this point, I wanted to try and do some stuff that I'd never tried before that can be a lot more efficient just as far as how it takes up space in the room. And so the first thing that I did was some Helmholtz stuff. So I started experimenting with Helmholtz. And so here we go. We're going down the Helmholtz rabbit hole. There's tons of information on the internet about this. I found a calculator that I was using. Here it is. I'm going to pull it up now and I can show you, you know, basically what I calculated. So the ones that I built are cylinders, and so the material that I like to use is these tubes for forming concrete pillars. But the smaller ones, you know, like the 12-inch diameter ones, you can just get at Home Depot. And there's some really cool features about them that make, you know, the process of making these tubes these Helmholtz resonators really, really easy. So they've designed these tubes where the ones that are labeled as being 12-inch diameter actually come in these tiny little variations of diameter size, so you can nest them together. And so you can put them together and slide them in and out to sort of, extend or shorten the length of the cylinder, and you can tune it to a specific frequency. So that can be really, really useful at a certain point. Some of the things that just sort of the general, characteristics of a Helmholtz resonator. I wanted to do relatively large ones, and so I was making ones that were 4 feet long, 12 inches in diameter, trying to get as much air volume as possible, because the larger the air volume of the resonator itself, the more influence it's going to have on the space. I mean, I can make a Helmholtz resonator that will resonate at 40 hertz. That's the size of a shoebox. But it won't really do anything. It won't have any effect on the room, because it's not affecting a large enough volume of air in the room to be able to have a huge influence on things. So I tried to make ones that were big enough where there would be a measurable difference in the room. I chose 4 feet by 12 inches to work with, and so. The principles are relatively straightforward. Anybody that's built them, you already know this. Anybody that's not familiar, it's very straightforward. You're making a resonant cavity, it's just like when you build a speaker. The speaker enclosure will have a resonance to it. You can change that resonance by adding a port and changing the size of the port, and then there's a length of the port that also has a huge influence on the resonance of it. All those things come into play, and so there's a calculator here that will calculate it for you. So here are the parameters that are relate to what I was building. And so you can see I put in 48 inches. They actually have it as radius. That was actually confusing. I for some reason, I always think in diameter, but they put this radius. So 6 inches, that's 12-inch diameter, obviously. And then, so there's the volume of the cylinder, type of an opening. So this is for the port. You have to have some sort of port in there. And so I just used a circle. I had some hole saws and tools for doing that. And so when I had roughly a 5-inch hole in that thing, I would end up in this range of around 40 hertz, and this was the frequency range that I was trying to address. And so I'll probably have to pull up something else so we can actually kind of like wrap our brains around really how we're trying to deal with this issue. So what I have, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit and explain why I'm targeting particular frequencies. So here's the graph, right? So from the outset, here's my big problem right here. It's right around 51 hertz. So earlier on in my adventures in acoustic treatment, I very naively thought like, hey, if I have a cancellation at 50 hertz, then it must be a problem with a resonance at 50 hertz. And that is actually not really how it works. And I learned that in this round of this. And one of the things that really informed this was Room EQ Wizard, which I'm going to pull up now. And so here is a simulation of my room. It's one of the benefits of doing a rectangular room. I know a lot of people like to use not have square angles in the room, and there are certainly benefits to that. One of the things that you lose is it's very difficult to do a simulation of the room and try and figure out what you're trying to fix. So here we are, and I've already sort of put some absorption in there, like 50% absorption across the whole bandwidth. So so here's how all this works. There's the dimensions of the room. These are the dimensions of my room. It's 25 feet 1 inch, 15 feet 9 inches. This is the width, and then the ceiling is just under 10 feet. It's 9 feet 9 inches. These are the positions of my speakers, and so. Because of the size of the cabinet, the actual sound emanates, about 2 feet 6 inches from the back wall. And this is the height of that low frequency driver, because I'm really only interested in, you can see that this spectrum analysis only goes up to 300 hertz. This simulation is really designed to just deal with low frequency issues. So I'm going to reduce this stuff a little bit. And you can see the floor I left unchanged. It's basically no absorption because, we all have to have something to walk on. It's very difficult to, and you can see this stuff changing. And you can see sometimes some things going up, some things going down. It gets very complex how this stuff all interacts. Here's the ceiling. This will definitely have some influences. Okay, and so here we go. The simulation shows a big cancellation right around 50 hertz. That's 49.9 or something. Very, very close, to what I'm experiencing in the room. So here's another one. This one's right around 100 hertz. So these are all shifted a little bit lower than what my actual room is. So here's what I figured out. These resonants, which are the axial length, so that's front to back, right? And so here's the first order here at 22 hertz. The frequency response of these Strauss monitors goes down to right about around this range, right around 23, 24 hertz. And so I end up having this lift right as the speakers are tapering off that would theoretically flatten that out at the end of the range of the speakers. And it ended up doing that to a certain degree, having this little lift right where the speakers start to give out and extend the range of them. Okay, so here's the second order harmonic. And so this is this one that's right around 44 hertz, 49 hertz, somewhere in there. So then there's another one here. Okay, it's a little hard to see with the contrast here. Right at 57 hertz. And so this is floor to ceiling. And this 50 hertz cancellation is an interaction between this resonance here and this resonance here. That's what I figured out. And so, when I first started, I was trying to make Helmholtz resonators at 50 hertz, and they weren't doing anything at all. I was like, what the hell's going on here? This should be doing something. And it wasn't until I started addressing the frequencies that were representative of the resonances in the room where it started to make a difference. So that's really important to know about tuning rooms. If you have a cancellation, the frequency that's being canceled isn't necessarily the frequency you need to absorb or dampen in the room. It's probably something above or below that's interacting with some other dimension to cause this cancellation. So another thing that was really helpful to check out was this thing, which shows you how the room modes propagate in the room. And so here's that first order at 22 hertz. So at the very front of the room and the very back of the room, you will have a huge buildup at 22 hertz with this length of the room. And it's pretty incredible. Like when you put that frequency up and you walk to the front of the room, walk to the back of the room, you hear it get a lot louder when you get close to the ends. And when you're right in the middle of the room, it fucking disappears, exactly like this graph shows. Here's the second order, okay? And so that's that like 44, 45 hertz in my room. And so it is also very, very loud at the front of the room and at the back of the room. And then at this 1/4 point, which is close to where I'm sitting, I'm probably closer, maybe closer to 1/3. I'm probably more like about here-ish, something like that. But in this position, like when I go a little bit forward here, you will hear 40 hertz vanish. It just goes away, or 44 hertz, whatever it is. And then you'll also see there's a peak in the middle, so it gets really loud in the middle of the room, but it's phase reversed. And so what ends up happening is these different phasings with these different amounts of energy of these modes in the room will collide at particular places in the room to cause cancellations at specific frequencies. And that is what's happening in this room, in my room, to cause this issue right here. It's a collision of the, 44, somewhere around 42, 43 hertz, and this one up here, which is around 57 hertz. So if you look at this one here, 57 hertz. Okay, so I figured that out at a certain point. Initially I was making Helmholtz resonators at, 50 hertz, and they weren't doing anything. So then I switched. Okay, let's make some Helmholtz resonators way down here at 40, 44 hertz, whatever, down there. Let me get back to my calculator here. So here's our length, here's our diameter, here's the size of the hole, and then here's the length of the opening. And this was the thing that I found the most challenging with Helmholtz resonators, is that getting the frequency, getting it to resonate at a higher frequency was more difficult, because I was using, resonators that had a larger air volume, so they would have more effect in the room. And so you get this initial calculation of this on this calculator, and I was getting this really high frequency, and I was first just like running frequencies in front of it and just trying to listen or feel the tube to see what was happening, and getting totally different results than what this calculator was showing. And so I researched it some more, and then found that there's this thing called end correction. And I searched and searched and searched to find out, okay, what value do I put in for the end correction? And I couldn't find anything that would deliver a result that was anything close to what I was actually testing in the room when I was trying to tune this to a specific frequency. And so I finally came up with a much more reliable way to test what the actual resonance is of the Helmholtz resonator that you built. And I'm going to show that in a second. We're going to get there. And then I was able to enter my own end correction value. And once I had that in there, then as I changed the other parameters, everything stayed, added up correctly. And so my end correction ended up being around 1.8, something like that. And so I think I ended up going a little bit lower, because the simulation is one thing, but then there's the reality of the room. And so what I did is I put a microphone in that back corner, and then did a frequency sweep and measured what the loudest volume was, what frequency was the loudest in the back corner of that room. And so that's what I really want to go after, because I'll be able to absorb the most energy in the room if I'm going after the frequency that is the most present there, or the most resonant in the back of the room. And so it ended up being closer to like 40, 41 hertz. So here we go. I was able to create an opening that was about 4.5 inches. The length of the opening was only 1/4 of an inch, because it's literally the length of the thickness of the end cap. So I'm using a concrete tube, and then I cut a disc out of 1/4 inch plywood, and I was just using Gorilla Tape to just tape it on there really quickly, just so I could test these things, get an airtight seal with the tape, and they were working. And I was able to get this measurement. So I played around with that a bunch, and I built one of them, put it in the back of the room, didn't make a big difference. Built another one, put it in the other corner, didn't make a huge difference. Or it would make it worse. The cancellation would get worse. And so then we were like, well, maybe we need more of them. So then we built like 5 or 6 of them, and had them like 2 in the corners, and then had a stack of them. And the way we had it was the closed ends were butted together, and then the ports were at the top of the bottom, like right at the floor, right at the corner of the ceiling. That's really where you get a lot of the energy building up. We did that. Again, was not making it necessarily better. It was, not doing what I was hoping it would do, and was, still kind of frustrating. So I wasn't really getting a huge result. So then I got suspicious of the material I was using for the Helmholtz resonators. So I was starting to feel like, basically, like a pipe organ, that's essentially a Helmholtz resonator. It's a big cylinder, there's a port in it, you blow wind through it, it resonates at a very specific pitch, actually creates a tone in the room. It's one of the things to be aware of with a Helmholtz resonator, is that if you design one, that's really, really efficient, it will ring in the room, like you'll have music playing and turn off the music suddenly, you hear this like sort of fade out in the room. So you do have to dampen them a little bit. And there's basically a trade-off between dampening and efficiency. So if you add soft material on the interior of the Helmholtz resonator, and I put little pieces of foam on the cap that went on, the solid cap that went at one end, just to dampen it a little bit, you'll get rid of that ringing. And what ends up happening is it's not as sharp of a peak. It sort of broadens out a little bit. So it's not quite as efficient at canceling or absorbing the energy of that very specific frequency, but it won't ring, and you get the benefit of it absorbing some stuff around it a little bit. So a little bit of dampening is good, so you don't have them ringing in the room. So I got suspicious about the material that I was using because, those concrete forms are relatively thin, cardboard, hard like cardboard material, and maybe only an eighth of an inch thick. And when I was testing the resonance of them, you could feel the whole thing vibrating, I thought, man, if this thing was really super solid, it probably would create a more specific and more efficient resonance. So I chased it down. I found 12-inch PVC pipe. They actually make that. It's huge. It's incredibly heavy. You have to buy it in these big, long lengths. It was a pain in the ass to work with because once I got it, I needed it in 4-foot sections. And so I had to figure out how to cut this thing that was 16 feet long. It was a real adventure getting it from the supply place that got it in my truck with it sticking over the cab, strapped down. It's crazy. But got it back, and then I had to figure out how to cut it. So I think this is a good time to show some videos about building these Helmholtz things, testing them. You can get the idea. So here's just a variety of stages of the process, me working with all these different materials and testing them, all that stuff. So check this out.
All right, so here's my latest cockamamie thing that I've got to figure out. I'm still working on these Helmholtz resonators, and I did a bunch of them with these concrete forming tubes, but my instincts are telling me there's just not quite enough mass there to really create a solid resonant chamber that's going to be really efficient. I think efficiency is being lost in the fact that the whole thing vibrates a lot. So I managed to find that they make 12-inch diameter PVC pipe. I found a place that sells it. It's this delightful sort of turquoise color here. And so then the question was, how the hell do you cut it? And try and cut a really nice, clean, even, plumb cut, a nice right angle cut. And I looked, see if there's tools for it. They're crazy expensive, thousands of dollars. So this is one of these, wake up in the middle of the night, I know I can do this. I cut out all of these discs, these wooden discs that were being used as the ends for the first run. Yeah, you can see the cutouts there. And I realized these are kind of the perfect shape, to be a cradle to hold this thing. And so there's a big long cradle that holds it. And then I put my little table saw on this cart here. And so the whole thing is being held right above this. So I have to turn the saw on and then roll this thing underneath the tube. It'll start cutting and then go over here and then rotate it by hand over the saw so that it gets cut all the way around the entire circumference of the thing. I actually managed to do the first cut. It worked. I gave this equal chances of either, there you go. ATC speaker is functioning as the fence, as it would be called, I guess, a very big fence. Sorry about that, ATC. But it's doing a great job of it. I gave this equal chances of working or the whole thing just completely exploding, the saw would bind in somewhere in there and get caught and throw the whole cart out, or who knows what would happen. But it worked. So I'm gonna try and do another one of these cuts, and we'll see what happens here. Let's see, may have to turn the phone over or something. Let's see how we're gonna do this. And so I've come up with a way to sort of test these things. This thing is supposed to be tuned down around like 41, 42, 43. That's the issue that I'm having. It's the second order of the length of this room. So initially, when we were tuning these things, I would just hold it in front of the speaker, and I could feel it when it would really activate and start vibrating. And then, I'd start realizing, like, man, it's probably not supposed to do that. So now what we have is this little piece of tissue hanging over the hole. And so you can really see when air is going in and out of there. When the tissue really starts moving, that's, what this thing is tuned to. So when I turn it off, you can see the tissue just sitting there. Okay, so there it is. Let me start this up again. Yeah, so you can see it freaking out there. And so this tube ended up being just slightly higher, right at 43.5 hertz. And you can watch what happens when I move up. Paper stops moving. So that's at 60 right now. So there we are, right at 43. And I'm going to go below that. Yeah, so we're really way down there. And it doesn't really move as much there. So it's pretty clear that 43 is where this thing is tuned. That thing's really freaking out. Okay, so I'm going to pause this, and we'll put up the cardboard tube version. So here's the cardboard tube version. Again, little piece of single ply of toilet paper there, and turn this on, and I believe this frequency wants to be a little lower because the walls of this tube, even though they're both supposed to be 12 inches, the walls of this one are only an 1/8 inch thick. The walls of that are 3/8 of an inch thick. That thing weighs about 50 pounds. This probably weighs about 5 pounds. It's a pretty big difference in the amount of mass there. And so this one, it looked like it was wanted to be a little lower. Yeah, maybe right around there. Yeah, so maybe more like around 41, somewhere there. So I'm going to start testing it in the room to see if it has a larger influence in the room, because these generally did not. We built a bunch of them. We had 5 at this low frequency to put in the back of the room. They really didn't do much. You can see all the experimentation that's been going on in here. So we'll see what happens. I'm gonna kind of clear a bunch of this stuff out, and then see if I can really quantify what this new version is or isn't doing. Let's see what we get there. All right, see what happens.
Okay, so you can see my questionable approach for cutting the tubes. It worked, and I didn't kill myself or cut off any fingers. And so, and just quick spoiler here: the really hard PVC Helmholtz resonator really did not make a huge difference. It wasn't enough of a difference to justify the hassle and cost of working with that material. So I abandoned that material and didn't work with it anymore. And really what ended up happening, and so this is another part of this whole thing that is very, very complex. So there were times where I would add absorptive material to the back of the room, and the cancellation would get worse. And that's because what's happening is there's a collision of these two resonances in my sitting position, my listening position in the room, that are causing this cancellation. And it's because they are phased opposite each other. And if you've ever done like a null, a phase nulling type experiment, When the volumes are super equal, then you get this really, really dramatic, cancellation. But if one is a little bit quieter than the other, then it doesn't cancel quite as much. And so, what could be happening in this case is, let's say this is the really low frequency, this is like the 41 hertz, and this is my 57 hertz, and I put absorption in the back of the room that decreases the amount of resonance in the energy in the room at my listening position, but it's actually bringing it closer in volume to this one, and so it cancels more. And so I think that's what was happening in the back of the room when I was putting stuff back there, and it's like, fuck, it's getting worse, We even tried putting a bunch back there to see if we could get past that point where it would, go past this point and get lower and lower to the point where we're actually seeing an improvement, past the real null point and get lower than that. But I could never get there with the Helmholtz resonators. So I screwed around with those things forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, and just could not get something on the back wall that was really, making a significant improvement. So with the realization that this was an interaction between this 40-ish hertz at the back of the room and 57-ish hertz between the floor and the ceiling, I decided, fuck it, let's go the other way. I'm going to go after the 57 hertz and see if I can get something to work there. And so for that, I needed to make a bigger hole in my Helmholtz resonator to raise this frequency. So the bigger the hole, the higher the frequency. So it turned out, when I started playing with stuff here, that like a 9-inch hole gave me my 57 hertz. So I cut a 9-inch hole in there. This time I used a template and just used like a jigsaw, because I didn't have like a hole cutting saw that would do that size. The jigsaw worked fine as long as you're close. It doesn't have to be perfectly round in there. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle. It's really just sort of like the size of the opening that matters, the total area of the opening that matters. So, I got it super close. I tested it. You could see in those videos, how I was testing it with the little sheet of toilet paper. That ended up being really, really helpful to figure out, really where these things are resonating, and I could adjust either the size of the hole or the length if I was going that way. But really, ultimately, using the standard 4-foot size, and adjusting the size of the hole got me there. And then, I didn't need to add any length, because if you add length to the hole, like if you put in a port with length to it, that just makes the frequency even lower. And that my problem was trying to get it higher with the volume of airspace that I wanted in the resonator. So then I had those, and I set up a thing where I had 50 hertz coming out of the speakers, a microphone right here, and just a decibel meter so I could see the level that was being picked up by the microphone in my listening position. And so you could see a huge cancellation right there. If I went to frequencies around it, the level came up a bunch. But, right in this position, it was very low. And actually, it was a little confusing numerically because it was showing as a negative number or no. I remember it got confusing at a certain point, and so then I set up an actual virtual VU meter so I could see the needle go up and down. And in this instance, I want to see the needle go up. I want to have more 50 hertz in my listening position as I'm moving around the room with this thing. Because when I was looking at the number, it got confusing. It was like, wait a minute, is this a negative number? Is this a positive number? If it's a negative number, I want the number to get lower in value, or it got confusing. So with a VU, it was very easy for me to go, oh, that's higher. That's what I want. Not trying to do math while I'm walking around the room with this fucking thing. So I found a really magical place in the room, and it was basically it's right at that like quarter length position in the room, and there was this spot where when I held it up to the ceiling, I could just feel it too go it started just vibrating like crazy, resonating like crazy, and you'd see the VU meter go whoop and come up. you know? And so it happened in both upper corners of the room, right up here. And so that was my success with Helmholtz resonators. And so let's pull up this graph. It's super interesting. So every time, because like in between a lot of these different tests, I'd stop. It would be the next day. I'd have to build a bunch of crap, like build some Helmholtz, go and get materials, whatever. It'd be days would pass, and then I'd start up again. I'd put the microphone back in, and even when you move the microphone just a tiny bit, you get a very different thing. So I'd have to create a new benchmark each time. So I'm not comparing to, because this was where I kind of left off. This was, all the tubes up front, and I was right here. And so then I came back the next day, and I discovered this whole thing, and I captured the difference that these Helmholtz things were making. And so I did a new benchmark. This is without the Helmholtz resonators up in these corners in the ceiling right here. I'll see if I can. Yeah, you'll see a picture of them later when I show a video that shows the end result of this room, which is kind of crazy looking. Okay, now check this out. Look what it did. This is so cool. So another pretty substantial gain here. This is almost here. So this is like 1, 2, 3, 4, almost 4 dB of reduction in this cancellation here. Here's the big thing for anybody that's looking lower in the screen. Look at that. Oh my goodness. That is a huge difference. It cut the decay time in this 60 hertz range in half. That is a huge difference. There was nothing else that I put in this room that did anything like that. And so that's really the benefit of the Helmholtz thing. Because, relative to the volume of the room, these are just 2 tubes that each have a volume of whatever that was, 3 something square feet. What was this? Yeah, 3.14 square feet is the volume. And so it's a total of, 6 feet and change of air volume that you're taking up in the room. And it's having this much effect on this frequency range. That is huge. So if you do get the Helmholtz resonators right, and you find them get the right position at the right frequency in the room, you can get this dramatic result with them. And so it took me days to figure this out. It took so long. Oh my God. I built so many of these things and tried so many different variations, so many frequencies, so many positions in the room. I screwed around with them forever and finally got something that was beneficial, So there you go. So then I had done that there, but still the back of the room, I wasn't having any luck with Helmholtz resonators in the back of the room. I tried all kinds of different frequencies. I set up ones where I could extend and shorten them, with a larger opening. So I had like the 9-inch opening, and then I would extend it so it would go all the way down to 40 hertz. I would try it all around there, everything. Nothing was really making a significant difference at 50 hertz. It was driving me nuts. And in theory, I really thought that it should have, and it didn't. So I went down a different road. I went down the Limp mass absorber road. I'd heard about them. I know a good friend, worked at Barefoot for a long time, Kean Reardon. He built a studio at his place now in Southern California, and was having a room mode issue. Acoustician came, did a Limp mass absorber in the back of his room. He said it made a huge difference. I was like, I'm doing that. Here we go, Limp mass. Let's get on it. Let's do that. And so, tons of information on the internet about Limp mass absorbers. The one that I found that I thought was kind of the coolest, let me see if I can pull this up here. Yeah, really cool document from this company, Buzz Audio. They are cool folks. They make great gear. I actually have a couple of their, inductor-based 500 series EQs. They're lovely. So this is their document on how to make Limp mass bass absorber. And I followed this. I actually went on the ASC website, read all of their stuff about Limp mass absorbers. All the information in here definitely was the same as what they were saying in ASC. All the math was the same. What they were coming up with was the same. So it's pretty straightforward. You build an enclosure. This is the actual Limp mass material. I used this mass-loaded vinyl for mine. That was 2 pounds per square foot. I'll show you the formulas for how that works. And then there's a depth to this thing, and what determines the resonant frequency of the absorber is the mass of this membrane, whether it's 1 pound per square foot, 2 pounds per square foot, whatever the mass per square foot is, versus the depth. So the distance between this membrane and this back wall of the enclosure is really what determines what the frequency is going to be. And so these are a little more fussy to build. You can see the design approach here. There's these cleats in here. You have to staple this stuff onto these cleats. You know, you have to build a relatively accurate square rectangle of some sort. You got to, put down some sort of sealant along this, edge here to make sure it's airtight and staple this whole thing down. It's not easy because it's really heavy at 2 pounds per square foot. I built very big ones. Again, it's a big room. I want to try and, if I'm going to build one, let's build a big one and try and have it make a big ass difference, and then you want to put some like absorptive material in the back. Same principle as the Helmholtz resonator. If there's no absorptive material in there, you will potentially get a sharper, more efficient cancellation at a very specific frequency. The absorptive material sort of broadens it out, but it's not quite as efficient. So I put some, I think I used some of the melamine, 2-inch melamine that I have in the back there. Here's the math if you want to get into that. He talks about it here. Apparently, the overall dimension of the thing doesn't really matter. Like if it's really this distance, dimension d, that does it, that determines the frequency, and so the height and width dimension doesn't really matter. The bigger it is, the more it'll absorb. So I built 2 big ass ones. I got this material. Here it is. You can see it. So this stuff is 2 pounds per square foot. There it is. You can use like a 3/4 inch sheet of plywood as the backer, and then you put some walls on there, and then you gotta staple this fucking thing to it. It's not easy, get that thing on there. And build this thing. It took a while. It took like a good half day to build the 2 boxes, get everything in there, seal it all up, get the vinyl on there, whatever. It's a big ass heavy thing. Yeah, so here's the math for calculating the frequency. I was again going for this like 40 hertz range, and so here this is the line that was relevant to what I was doing. So I adjusted this to 2 pounds per square foot. That was the material I was working with. So at a depth of 8 inches, that put me right in my zone, 42.5 hertz. That's what I built. Here I'll show you. There's a video I have where you can see them in the back of the room along the way. One of the experiments. You can check that out real quick. This is what they look like. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, and so that's what they look like. Here's the result. So here's another one of these rounds where this was my baseline measurement. So I'll basically have a status in the room. This is theoretically the point where I have basically only tubes all in the front of the room. Tons of tube traps in the front of the room. And now I'm trying to deal with, they took care of this thing pretty well. And then now I'm just dealing with this and this, trying to deal with it with the back of the room. And so this is no Limp mass absorber, and then this is with 1 Limp mass absorber, and this is with Limp mass absorbers in the 2 back corners of the room. Not a huge difference there, I mean, we've got maybe 1, 2, 3, 3 dB, something like that, And here, it made it worse. And so it was a little bit of a trade-off there. So we did get a little bit of improvement here, but then in the wrong direction there. And so those things, I just decided, like, these are a fucking pain in the ass to build. They're big and heavy, and, I don't know if these are going to get me there. They may be too specific to this frequency, causing problems here, I don't want to build a whole wall of these things. That just doesn't, it's not feeling like the way to go. So I decided, okay, here's my next experiment. In my room, I have these 19-inch equipment racks that are mounted in the wall. And so at the time, there were some open spaces. I didn't have all of my equipment placed in the racks yet. On the other side of it is the machine room, and the doors weren't installed on the machine room. And so basically this was an opening in the side of the wall. And so it's the same thing as having a door open in the room. And if you've ever done acoustics on a room, there's a huge difference between door open, door closed, and you got to tune your room. Do you like it with your door open or your door closed? And so you can hear they're still doing construction. They're putting in another window. Yeah, it just never ends. And so at a certain point, I made the effort to seal up these racks. So I put in blank solid panels wherever there was no gear. I used tape to cover up any other vents or whatever, and just try and seal this thing up as best as I could. And so this was that experiment. So this is the racks not sealed, and there's the racks sealed. Maybe a difference there. I mean, really, really, really minimal. So not a huge issue. I've since had the door put in on the machine room, and I haven't had a chance to retest this room since that door was installed. So there's going to be a whole other round of this with me seeing how that affects things. Okay. Now we'll go into this next thing. So, and I mentioned this in the clip that you're about to see, but this was a comment that came in as I was working on all this stuff about the size of the VPR panels, and so I decided, let's try that experiment. Here we go. All right, so this is the next experiment with the control room, and so and this was actually inspired by a YouTube comment on one of the episodes. So I'm doing these panels. These are the ones that have, there's the metal sheet there. There's foam on the back. This is all melamine foam. So this back wall, I'm about to convert this back wall. So you can see where the areas that didn't get oil on it. This is the whole room is plywood, and I'm just oiling it with some linseed type oil, or specifically linseed oil. And so I want the absorbers on this back wall to reach down further, because the modes for the length of this room, it's a long, span on the length of the room. It's quite low. And so we've got, I had 6 panels that were roughly this size, a little bigger than those. And, they're not reaching down far enough to really address the frequencies that are an issue in this direction. Certainly not the first order, which is down around, 22 hertz, something like that. Second order, obviously, is, an octave above that. So it's like around 45 hertz, something like that. And these things, they really start to give out, around 60 hertz. And if you look at the graph, even at 60 hertz, for the people that made these, at 60 hertz, there's not a huge amount of absorption still going on at that point. They're very efficient, leading up to that, but, depending on the size, they start to give out. And so somebody made the comment that the quarter waveform rule applies to these types of absorbers as well. So not just with the soft insulation, but with these types of absorbers. So, the bigger they are, potentially the lower frequency they'll absorb. So what's going to happen today is I got to pull all of these pegs out that they were hanging on. So there was 6 of them on here, and the metal panels were roughly, or actually exactly 3 feet by 4 feet. And it's like the ones that are on the back wall. Those are covered up with tubes right now. And then, so I'm going to put 4 huge, really tall of these metal plate absorbers on this back wall, and see if I can get them to reach down lower, in the spectrum, and grab onto some of the stuff that's really more of an issue in this direction of the room, front to back. And so So I'm going to pull all these pegs out, and then I'm going to do 4 pairs across the top. And the panels are now going to be 8 feet tall and 41 inches wide is what ended up working out with the materials that I can get. So that's what I'm going to do. Pull all these pegs out, remeasure to go across the top, and we're going to have 4 8-foot ones and see, if they really start reaching down and addressing the frequency range that needs to get attenuated a little bit. I'm hoping it'll start grabbing the 45 hertz range because that'll really make a difference for my listening position. I still have this cancellation around 50 hertz, and it seems to be an interaction between that 45 hertz between the front and the back and 57 hertz going floor to ceiling. And these Helmholtz guys up here, which are tuned to 57 hertz, they really worked. It was my first Helmholtz success, so I'll get more into that at some point. But here I go. I'm gonna move some pegs. Okay, so there it is. There, I'm talking about what the vision was there. Explain the whole concept, and you got a glimpse of the Helmholtz resonators up in these corners. And it was very important that the port actually face the wall. I forgot to mention that before. That was a huge part of it. So you got a little glance at those. Okay, so check this out. So I captured it both ways. So here's the room with the small resonant panels, or the ones that you can see, over, they're about this size. They're roughly 3 feet by 4 feet, and they're still there behind the tubes back here. And there was 6 of them that covered this back wall. So this is with those right here. And then this is with the large ones. And so there it is. No difference. So did that experiment and didn't matter. And so those panels just really aren't reaching down low enough to address this issue. Let's see, there's another note here. What is it? Okay, yeah. So then I started getting some other stuff. And so yeah, I was thinking maybe big, huge sheets of metal, maybe that'll make the difference. Didn't do it. Okay, so back to trying to figure out what to do. So at this point, I had exhausted just about everything. I tried Helmholtz back there. I tried Limp back there. I tried doing bigger VPR panels back there. Nothing was fucking doing it. So at this point, I'm like, screw it. At this point, why don't I just go back to using tube traps? I know those will do something back there. And the material's available. It's not wildly expensive, compared to some of this stuff that you get into to do this. I think it's very reasonably priced, for building these things. So I decided, fuck it, I'm going to build a bunch of huge ass tubes back there. These ones were going to be 20 inches in diameter, just slightly smaller than the ones up there, 2-inch thick walls, and I'm just going to fill that whole back wall with 9-foot tall tube traps and see if that makes a difference. Damn it. Something's got to work, And so that was the next experiment. And so here we go. Here's small resonant panels, and then this is with the tube traps on the back wall. Look at that. Yay! It's doing stuff. Yay! Oh my God. I was getting so frustrated along the way, trying all these things that were really supposed to be doing stuff, but didn't. And man, this one was huge. I was so pleased to see that, as I was very concerned about this. It would be very hard to navigate EQing a snare drum with that cancellation going on. So that was a relief. This is totally in a usable range now. So now there are some other variables about the tubes that I had never really had an opportunity to test before, and that's really what this whole build, this whole studio thing has been about. Is I had the time, I had the resources to fuck around and really learn some shit, and so I want to just for myself know, like, do you have to have it closed at each end? Do you need a cap on both sides? Can you leave it both open on both sides? What if I leave the paper on? What if I take the paper off? You know, do I need to have a hard surface on the front of this or not? Like, how does all of this stuff affect this? And this was my opportunity to figure it out. And so I did. So here we go. Okay, so here's the next thing to experiment with. I have put 8 giant tube traps in the back of the room. I'm really trying to deal with, you know, the issues that I'm having lengthwise in the room. And putting these tubes in here was definitely an improvement. It helped way down in the 50 hertz range that I've been grappling with, but it also helped in this 200 hertz range. So there was some sort of harmonic in there or some, I don't know, complex interaction going on that was fucking with that, causing a cancellation there. It's making the snare drums, you know, just not feel like they were supported right. I put these tubes in, got to listen to stuff again. It was really cool to hear the difference, like feel the weight under the snare drums when you're in the listening position. So that was cool. So now these tubes were not really finished, so there are no caps on the top of them, and so they're just open on the top. And this is an opportunity for me to just try and quantify if that really makes a difference or not. Like what is really going on with these things? And so I just cut a bunch of these 20-inch discs. All these tubes, each one of these is 20 inches with a 2-inch wall. So I'm just going to put all these on top of there, put a little weight on there so, you know, they'll be compressed down a little bit and should, you know, be a good enough seal that, you know, it doesn't really have to be perfect. There's like a little pilot hole. I'll put some tape over that, seal that up. I don't even know if that's really that important, but it'll certainly be different than having it totally open at the top. And so having it open, you know, turns this sort of like half like a sealed absorber and half into, you know, like a Helmholtz resonator of its own. But, you know, it's a very subtle version of it because, you know, in this case, you know, the outside paper is off of it. And so the walls are porous. And so it's really hard, you know, I don't know if that the inside chamber is going to create any resonance at all. The ones that have the paper on the outside, so air can't pass through the walls of it, might have a little bit more of a resonance to it, but that gets dampened a lot, obviously, by the fiberglass on the inside. So I did try and actually put one of these down and use my little toilet paper trick for seeing if there was a resonance there, and there was no real clear resonance to this thing that I could find with my setup. So I'm going to put the caps on, do another graph of the room, see what that does, see if it really changes it, and then after that, I'm going to take all the paper off. And you know, I only left the paper on just because they would hold together better because the seams were glued. You know, this is 3 of them. You can see it over here. It's 3-foot sections all glued together with just like liquid nails, and so I'm you know, my understanding is that these should not be covered with paper, but even with the paper on there, I got a good result. So who knows? I don't. Maybe it's better with the paper. I don't. You know, who knows? This stuff's so complicated. But this will be my opportunity to test it. So I'm gonna put the caps on. I'll graph that. Then I'm gonna cut the paper off and graph it without the paper on there. If it was actually better with the paper, then I got to figure out how to get it back on. So I'm hoping it's better without, but we'll see what happens. All right, here we go. All right, we have a result. I put all the little caps on there. Had to weigh one down. It was a little warped. The other one's sat on there good enough. No real appreciable difference there. I don't know if you can see this graph okay, but I'll be able to pull it up with, you know, screen capture when I actually post this. But yeah, not a big difference. Time to take the paper off. That's a little more serious because if it's good the way it is, then I got to figure out how to get it back on. All right, wish me luck. That is with tubes, with paper on them, with the caps. There it is, right there. And so it actually got a little bit worse. So don't need the caps. There's no dramatic improvement there in the performance, at least the way it's interacting in this room. So now I know I don't really have to do that. And you know, all these things for me are just like saving time and money. Like if I don't have to take the time to go and get the plywood and cut the discs and glue them on there, I don't want to have to fucking do it. You know, if they work without it, then it's just less work, you know, and cost and time. So, okay, so what is this? So now I went back to no caps, because that clearly, it seemed a little bit better without the caps. And so then, okay, and there's a video about this. I'm probably going to end up repeating myself a little bit. But so I talk about it in there. And so then I want to see, is it better to have the paper, leave the paper on there, or take the paper off? All right, I got all the papers off. Let's do a graph. See what we got. Here comes the sweep. 5 seconds. Whoa. Okay, let's see what happened here. Oh my goodness. Yeah, no real significant difference. And maybe a tiny difference here. I mean, really minuscule. They're showing like a much longer decay time with this, which is potentially problematic. So this might actually be better with the paper on. Damn it. Okay, so here's the result right here. It's not a huge difference. You know, maybe there's a little bit, you know, of energy loss here, not major. I mean, you can see definitely it's lengthening the reverb time, but, you know, the scale of this right now, this is 0.2, so this is like, you know, 0.05 difference in the length of reverb time, you know, in this frequency range. You can definitely see the sort of reflectiveness of the paper in the room up in the high frequencies, so you can see that lengthening a little bit. And so, you know, at the end of the day, maybe it was a little better in the low frequencies with the paper, maybe, I don't know. And then later, you know, if I wanted to dampen this stuff a little bit, it would be easy to put a, you know, I have to figure out how to cover these tubes anyways, because they look hideous in the back of the room. So I'm probably going to come up, you know, create some frames that I stretch fabric over that is going to cover up all these tubes. You know, I'll do that in the front of the room, cover up the tubes in the front of the room, figure out what to do with the stuff in the ceiling, try and make this a little bit more, you know, aesthetically appealing, because it's kind of insane looking in here right now. But I've learned this lesson before. I get it to sound right first, then figure out how to get it to look right. If you do it the other way, you waste a lot of time and money. So there it was, paper on, paper off. Maybe paper on's good. It could be different in a different circumstance, but honestly, you know, looking at both of these again, either of these would work fine. You know, if I left the paper off, I still probably would have gotten to the same result. You know, this is just such a minute difference down here. So let's see what else I got here that I was. Okay, so then I started adding some more tubes around the room that you can see. Yeah, you can see a little bit of improvement here. And my next experiment was, I wonder if you put a hard surface on the face of these things, because I've seen some of the tubes made that way. And sometimes they'll call them abfusers, so they absorb in some frequency ranges, but then diffuse in other frequency ranges, and that's what these would do. If you have a hard, you know, surface on the front of this cylinder, you know, it's this, you know, it's not a flat surface, and so reflections would get bounced off in all different directions and different timings and stuff, and so it can function as a diffuser, but also be absorbing low frequencies behind it. And so I did that experiment as well. So maybe the paper, you know, isn't the best thing to have on the front if it's beneficial to have a hard surface on the front. So I went and found tubes, and what I do, again, it's these concrete forming tubes for making these big concrete cylinders, and And so I found a place that had ones that were, just under, like close to 20 inches. I like to do it so the tube is like a little bit smaller than the diameter of the actual tube trap. And so then you cut it in half, and when you put it on there, it'll sort of like hold itself onto, the tube trap. And so you have this like half cylinder, and you can pull it apart, put it on the tube, and when you let go, the stiffness of that hard cardboard will sort of grab on. And so I got a bunch of those. I covered up all the faces of the tube traps with this hard material to see what that would do. And so, yep, so here's that result. Again, not a significant difference. And, some places you're kind of trading one for the other. And again, you see the huge difference in the high frequency range just because there's a hard surface that's now facing back into the room. And so all of these higher frequencies get, reflected back more in the room. It lengthens the reverb time in the room in that range. Okay, so then, so I decided, that's probably not worth it. It's not really making a substantial difference, down in this world. And this, I'm probably better off not having all of that. I feel like it's probably better to have all of the decays a little bit more uniform across the frequency spectrum. I don't want to have more, a greater degree of decay time here. And so now, I made a discovery along the way. So the controller, you can't really see it in this angle, but I have double doors to give a better, sound isolation for the control room. And at one point, I discovered that when I leave one of the doors open, the one that's closest to me, it does this right there. And so it's probably because you can really see what's going on here, is that with and without this door open. So with this door closed, I have these two walls that are parallel all the way down, right? And so then when I open one of the doors, it breaks that up in one place, and it probably changes, the resonance in a way that, spreads this out a little bit. So it's not so focused right at this, in this, whatever it is, 50 hertz. Yeah, so it's a little lower now at this point as there's more absorption in the room. And so this ended up being a huge discovery. It saved me a lot of work. It spread this out, and conceivably, if these sidewalls were not parallel, it could have given me this same kind of a benefit. Wasn't the approach I took this time. I went golden ratio and parallel walls, and here I am. So now, when I'm, and honestly, having to open and close two doors all the time is kind of a pain in the ass anyway. So, the inner door I pretty much leave open all the time, and there's still plenty of sound isolation with the one door, so I'm happy to just leave the one door and not use one of them. I might take it off at some point if I really am convinced that I don't need the isolation. So there's that. So now from this point, I'm working with, just the one door closed, and had a huge benefit there. Okay, so now what did I do? So now I started. These Strauss monitors have these pedestals that they come on, and it's basically a square box that's empty on the inside. And so, I have basically all of the voids around the speakers filled with absorptive material. And so I did the experiment of filling that void with absorptive material. And so this is that experiment. So not a huge difference there, but yeah, so maybe a tiny little benefit here. Not a huge amount. I mean, for some reason it ended up extending the resonance here, but or just the reverb time in this frequency range, but still a slight benefit in the frequency response. So I left it in there. Okay, so now let's see what else I got. I've got so many of these things in this journey here. Yeah, so we're getting close to the end here. So this is before I was getting ready to start playing around with some EQ. This is, all of these are me just trying tubes in different places in the room. And so all of these tubes are like the ones that are above me. I tried ones to the side, all kinds of stuff. And they're all just 3 feet long, me just trying them in different places, experimenting in the room. Okay, so this one says, yeah, 3 tubes above. This is two tubes up more towards the front on the ceiling. And this is without those two, so you can kind of see the difference there. And so sometimes it makes things better, sometimes it makes it worse, but this was a little bit better. So the yellow one is with the couple of tubes up closer to the front of the speakers. This was without, and so I was losing some energy there. Okay, this is with ceiling and front sides, so it's still, gaining some ground here still. Okay, so then I was having this thing here, this cancellation right around 800 hertz. And so I figured out that that is a reflection off the floor. And so then I put some cushions on the floor. It was leftover melamine foam, and I'll probably make those as these they'll just look almost like furniture cushions that will just sit on the floor up there. There's not really anything going on up there anyways. Occasionally I have to go up there to adjust a compressor or something, but it's easy enough to just step over it. And this is the difference that it makes right there. It's pretty substantial in the mid-range. So that was the other thing that I found. Okay, so then now we're starting to EQ some stuff. I'm tinkering around with that, and ultimately ended up here. And so this is the final comparison between with and without the EQ, and that's where I ended up. So that was the comparison between this and here. So this is the final end thing with EQ. Sorry, I sort of breezed through all of this stuff. There was really too much throwing things around the room to really document every single stage of that. I tried to as much as I could to where tubes were good or bad or whatever. But I mean, I was basically, I have dozens of these things, and I was just trying them all over the place, to see where it was beneficial and where it wasn't. So the end result is I still feel very strongly that the tubes are a huge part of it. So if we go back again and we look at, this is without any EQ at all on the speakers, and compare it to this. So I would say the vast majority of the benefit that we're seeing here is from the tube traps. There was the 2 Helmholtz resonators up here, which you'll see in this video clip in a second. You'll see these yellow quick tubes up there. Those are the Helmholtz resonators. And then actually having the door open made a big difference. So those things combined are what really made the difference from this, to this yellow one. And it would be impossible without the tubes. And you can see the dramatic difference in the reverb time. In the range that was really a problem. I'm having this 50 hertz cancellation, and it really seems like it was the 57 hertz range that is probably, floor to ceiling. There's probably a version of it there. There's probably one going this way. And the tubes, I think, are really the thing that made the huge difference here. We can kind of go back and let's see. That's an interesting question. So we did see that the Helmholtz resonators cut it in half at one point. Right now this was over 0.6, and now we're just over 0.2. So this is the reverb time length down in the 60 hertz range is 1/3 of what it was in the beginning, and so a lot of that is the tubes. If you kind of go along here, yeah. So these ceiling ones. So this is with ceiling and front side. So this is a bunch of tubes in the front, and so you can just see, how it's, this one with these extra tubes. It just, continues to reduce this stuff and get me, closer to where I was at the end there. This point right here was basically just tubes in the front and the back, and then I started playing with tubes everywhere else in the room, and it really got me from here to here, with the reduction in the reverb time in the room, and it got me from down here, to here with the tubes. And so just, the accumulation of all of that stuff really does make a difference. I think the tubes and the VPR panels are especially efficient at soaking up this range, and that's why I think this range is, has such a short reverb time in the room. And, I don't know, there might be a benefit to having it, having more energy here, but, often I've had sort of the reverse problem where if you just put like a couple inches of foam on the wall or fiberglass on the wall, you end up with this kind of like little pile here, because 1K and up gets absorbed really, really efficiently, and all this stuff shortens out. But then you get this little sort of buildup in this, and the room ends up sounding kind of stuffy and congested. So the point I'm trying to make is that the tubes are really the thing. I made a video to show how I build these tubes. Let me show you that now. You can see this. Here it is. I just did this yesterday. I had a couple tubes. The one that I built is right there, sitting behind me. So check it out. Building a tube trap. Super easy. All right. Here we go. This is the tube traps that I've been building. I have two tubes here. Sometimes the 3-foot length, they all come in these 3-foot lengths. 3 foot will work fine, but if you need something longer, then you gotta extend them, put them together. So this is how I do it, and the good news is this is so incredibly simple. It doesn't get any easier than this. So these tubes are 8-inch inside diameter. When you buy these things, it always goes by the inside diameter, because they're really designed to insulate pipes, and so they're going by what size pipe you want to insulate, so it's always inside diameter. So this thing, you can see right here, it says 8 by 2, so 8-inch inside diameter, 2-inch wall, so the outside diameter ends up being about 12 inches. And so, what I do, I just take some regular old construction adhesive. This is one of the many versions of that, and just put a ton of it on there. I do like 2 big beads around here, because you're trying to adhere together this porous soft material, and it's going to sort of soak into the material. And so you kind of need a lot on there so it'll soak in and still have enough to grab together. Pretty straightforward. There is a seam on here when you first get them. This paper on the outside is optional, and so they have like a little strip that you can pull off that reveals an adhesive surface here, and so you can pull the strip off and lock it in. And the way these things are made, there's actually a seam in the cylinder, and so they actually open up, so you can put it around a pipe and then seal it shut with this paper thing. So these are already sealed like that. I already did that part of it. It's all taped up, so it just keeps it in the shape of a cylinder, holds it all together. And so if you want to be picky about it, you can line up the seams of this stuff like this here. Doesn't really affect the performance, but so like that. Boom. It's on there. Got yourself a 6-foot tube trap. I mean, it just couldn't be any easier than that. If it takes a little while. This glue needs to dry overnight, and so if you want to be able to move this thing around, it also comes with these adhesive strips that go around here. So you can put this thing on there, and then you can move it around without the risk of them coming apart, because the adhesive hasn't hardened enough at all to really hold these things together. It won't really work until tomorrow. We're holding it together. So then you take this thing Try and center it as best you can. And just go around. Let's see what I'm doing. There we go. So that'll hold the thing together. So if you want to pick it up and put it into place and start actually trying to use it in the room, see what it does, you can do that. And so then, you know, a lot of the ones that I've seen that are made by other companies have end caps on them. And so if it's sitting on the floor, I don't bother putting an end cap because the floor ends up being the cap. And so you don't have to waste your time cutting out a disc, you know, to put on there. But if you want to put a cap on, here's one that I cut. It still has some tape on there from, I glued it onto one of the Helmholtz resonators. Here, I'll pull this tape off so let's get a better look at it. Let's see if I can get this off. Yeah. So it's a wood disc. I put a piece of tape here because, you know, the hole cutting jig, it's basically like this arm that you put a router in, and there's an anchor point in the middle, so you have to drill a hole. The anchor holds it, you know, to a particular spot, and then you go around in a perfect circle with a router and cut out a really nice wood disc. And so you could throw that on top, and you would do the same thing, just put the same construction adhesive on there, and then, you know, put your end cap on there. And it's still up in the air whether this really is better or not. It's the point where it really does change is if this thing is floating up in the air and both ends are open. I think that definitely changes it, because I had a situation when I had some tubes that I'd put over here on these equipment racks, and ultimately they won't be able to sit on those equipment racks. I need that table space as a workspace to be able to put, you know, guitar amp heads and stuff like that. And so I wanted to elevate the tubes. And so I put them there, and as soon as I lifted them off that surface and both ends were open, it totally changed how it was affecting the acoustics in the room. So I think there is a pretty significant difference between having no end caps and having one side covered. So I think that's something that's important to figure out. And, you know, I'm going to keep saying this through all of this stuff, like the acoustics are so complex that there could be a situation where having the paper on these tubes is better in this context, but isn't in another context. And so I think a lot of times you just have to experiment and try it. But the overall thing definitely does work really well. Like once you actually get a tube of a particular size, they're very broadband. It's the other thing that I really liked about it. As I was screwing around with these Helmholtz things, I did a bunch of these. You can see this is one of the ones. This is actually the style that ended up working in the positions up in the ceiling here, and I still have the tissue on there when I was testing the frequency of this one. And you know, they can make a really huge difference, but it's so narrow. Like they're so tuned. They're very efficient at a very, you know, a specific frequency. You really have to get it at exactly the right frequency in exactly the right place in the room, or they just don't do a whole lot. I mean, I screwed around with these forever trying to figure it out, and finally found one position where it made a difference. And with the tubes, they're real dummy proof in that way. It's like you can, as soon as you bring them in the room and you start moving, they start to do their thing. They're very broadband. They just absorb a lot of energy down in low frequencies very efficiently for the amount of volume that they take up in the room. So it still seems like tubes are kind of the way to go, and super easy to build. Couldn't be any easier. Not super expensive. You know, this stuff, if you find a supplier locally, they're really not that expensive. So I ended up back with the tube traps. Hey, quick interruption here. I realized when I was putting this stuff together that I forgot to mention the material or the product that's being used to create these tube traps, and so I wanted to do that really quick. Here it is. It's a company called Johns Manville. There may be other people that make these things, but this is the stuff I am using. So you can go to their website, you go to pipe insulation, and then this is what I'm using right here. This is the stuff that has the paper on it. So you can go here, view the data sheet for it. There it is, and then you can see what it comes in. So this right here shows you the wall thickness here, and then the size of pipe that it can cover. And so, I was in the 2-inch thick wall, and you can put that on a pipe that is anywhere from a 1/2 inch in diameter to 24 inches in diameter. All of my stuff was, covering, had an inside diameter that was anywhere from, like 8 inches to 16 inches. So that is what I'm using. John's Manville. Okay, so, I talked a little bit about the end cap thing again, experimentation that I was doing on the sides here. That's something that has to get finalized at some point, because right now I don't have tubes there, like I said in the video, and I am going to want to get those back in there and try and, because right now my control room doesn't sound exactly like this. I had to get to work and get some of these tubes out of the way. I didn't have time to really sort that out yet. So yeah, I'm going to get back to that. And so now here's one last video I'll show. This is showing the room where it was when I got this capture, which is really, the sort of end goal. And so you can check that out. I put it on a wide angle and just sort of pan around the whole room. You can see all the tubes in the room and where I ended up. Here it is. Okay, well, I think I finally reached the end of the rainbow with this acoustic treatment, or at least, the significant portion of this process. And I'm going to just pan around the room here. Y'all can see where we ended up. Let me put it on wide so you can really see. Here we go. There is the room. So many tubes. Oh my God. There's the whatever VPR resonant metal panel thingies on some sections there. And still, you can see it's just still sort of like a crazy, I literally just finally finished. And you can see I have some stuff on the ground here on the floor. More melamine foam on the floor. I'll probably wrap that with some fabric or something. But there was definitely a reflection off the floor that was really fucking with 800 hertz. So those things are just going to hang out in here. It's just going to be part of it. And let's see here. This is what the end of the rainbow looks like. I'll be able to pull this up as a screen capture right there. And I only had to do 2 EQ moves, relatively subtle. I'm doing it with MPEQ 1s. And this is where I ended up. The cool thing is like, so I'm averaging out 1K is on this scale is probably around +5, something like that. So, I like a lot of extra low end. It's just more satisfying to listen to. And these speakers, man, they go way low. So I'm still, at 23 hertz, I'm still basically flat with, maybe 22 hertz. I'm still basically flat with 1K. And there's a lift in there. That lift was part of the design of the dimensions of the room. I actually, if you look at the, I'll pull all this up, but I designed the resonance of the room to boost right where the speakers would start to give out. And so they would extend that already amazing subby low end of these speakers. So I think that part of it really worked. So I'm just sort of documenting what this looks like. So I'm gonna have to pull shit apart a little bit to start actually hooking up all the gear. That is really about to happen. Everything's in place. All the wiring is in the troughs, but none of it's really plugged into the racks. I've been monitoring everything with this so far to do all the room tuning, but now it's really time to plug in a studio. Oh my God. So here I go. So there you have it. Whole lot of tubes. And you know, I'm going to do one more round of this before I get ready to make it look nice. And so just finalize it. You know, like I mentioned, I got a new door in the mix for the machine room. That's going to affect things. I got to see what happens with that. See how that affects things. There'll be one final tweak on everything, and then I'm going to make the moves to cover all of this insanity up and have it just be a much more clean, simple, you know, surface that you're seeing in the room. And I'm done. Then I'm just gonna. This is what I'm gonna do. I mean, I've already been working on it. It feels incredible in here. Working on music in here is so good already, and I know it's not actually as good as what this graph is showing right here. This was when it was really super duper dialed, and I had to deconstruct it a little bit. So there you go. There is some more stuff about building this. You know, I haven't really finished the smaller sound room yet. There's a bunch of stuff they have in the big room. We added a bunch of curtains. It looks amazing in there. Did a bunch of recording there. The room sounds amazing, like I was talking about earlier. Like I got the chamber going. The chamber sounds amazing. There's so much fun stuff to check out that we'll be able to get into. I think next week we are going to be able to do some actual music stuff. I'm so excited to share something from Grace's new record. This is going to be the same issue I had with the Daylight album. That it's just going to be really hard for me to not just talk about that record all the time. And this new one, I think, you know, I don't know, might even be more exciting for me. So next week we do some music stuff. It's going to be super fun. I'll see you then. All right, bye.